Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Viriyena tukkhaṃ macceti ti. So Korka, I'd like to take leave of the Sangha to say a few words and express my greetings then to the lay people here. Another Sunday afternoon. So today I'll just say a few words which came to mind on the subject of relating to ourselves, notions of self-esteem and how this affects our ability then, or our keenness to put forth effort and relating to one another. It's a subject quite relevant to this international community of ours, both the monks, but also effort as a key element of the path of practice. We just chanted the Eightfold Path, right effort, very important factor. The first factor of the last section, what's called the Samadhi section, right effort, divided into 4 areas, is something which has to be understood, I think, very important. But we have to understand ourselves first and how we relate to notions of effort. And linked a little bit to this idea of self-esteem or how we feel about ourselves. So this was triggered by last week or so. I listened to my first podcast, very interesting. It was shared with me by somebody who's not a monk but very close to the Sangha, and he found it quite interesting. And essentially, it was one of these discussion. It was a kind of podcast about on issues to do with society, thought, thinking, psychology, the mind, etc. And he was interviewing a psychologist who's from the University of British Columbia, who many years ago had done one of these studies, if you like, with students. This is in partnership with his colleagues in Japan. Students in Japan and America. And the idea, the premise or the basis was to try and see how, what worked in terms of stimulating students to put forth effort, how they responded to certain stimulus, particularly feedback, what the effects of negative feedback were. And so, and before I say this, I know that a lot of these psychological studies, they are in a sense generalizations. They don't apply to everybody. And one of the dangers is, of course, that they usually take place in the States. Most psychology is studied in the States, apparently, and on university campuses. So often you get these great generalizations being made about the whole world based on American college students, which I think are not necessarily representative of the whole world. But anyway, this one, in a sense, is at least pointing to certain difference between, say, US and Japan. So, and I also think that if there's kind of good data there, if you can really plot something on a graph or see some facts, it can at least point in a certain direction. It's not absolute ultimate truth, but it can be interesting and thought-provoking. So I'll start by explaining what this little study, how it was set up. So basically, these professors, they got the Japanese and the American students together, or maybe they were done separately, but they had the students, and they first had them doing a test, as is the case in a lot of these studies. It's a bit of a setup, and they had these students doing a test which they thought was to do with creative thinking and troubleshooting and problem solving, etc. And they're writing down their answers to these questions. Now, so unbeknownst to the students, half of the tests were much, much harder than the others. So half the students both the Japanese and the Americans, are taking tests which are much harder than the other half. And so this test is divided into two sections, and after section one, the first half of it, if you like, the students they're given the answers to how they've been doing so far, say the first 20 questions, and they're told to grade themselves based on their results. So obviously the students that have been doing the much harder test, when they get the answers and they grade themselves, right or wrong, their grades aren't very good. They're not doing very well. And the half that have this quite easy test are doing really well. Okay, so they grade themselves and think, oh, great, I'm doing really well. So are you following this? Is this clear? Okay. Then they say, okay, now we're going to go to phase two, the second half of the test, which takes place, you do it on a computer, and it's done by, it's like multiple choice. So they take them into another room, and so remember, half the students are feeling, good about themselves, I'm doing well. The other half are feeling, kind of failing, basically. And so they sit them down at the computers, and they start them doing this multiple choice. Then they sort of stage or they fake a computer crash. Okay, and so the computers aren't working. And they say to them, okay, well, we'll go and get somebody who can come and fix this computer, get it going again. But here's another computer which is working, and here are some of the types of questions that you're going to do in the test. So while we wait, you can use this and just practice. Okay, just practice your, see how you can kind of improve. And so this is the real test, if you like. So this is the real thing that the psychologists are seeing. How the students respond now that they've got this free time that they can practice and they can improve themselves. Okay, and this is the sort of the interesting part, if you like. So basically, the Japanese students who had on grading themselves for the first half of the test had seen that they were doing rather badly. They all really went to that computer and tried really hard, and they were really motivated at that point to figure this out and sort of try and do better for the second half of the test. The US students who'd been doing really badly hardly put any effort into it at all. And the opposite was true, that the Japanese students who'd been doing well, they didn't really seem to be motivated to, say, improve their scores. But the US students who felt, wow, I'm doing really well, I must be, I'm doing well, or I must be at the top of the percentile, they were very motivated to, make themselves the best. So, okay, so what might you draw from this? So it's just interesting then in terms of then what negative or positive feedback does to us. So that the simple generalization is that people from certain cultures respond well to a bit of a, you could say, negative feedback. Come on, you're not doing well enough, get with the program, catch up with your friends. Whereas, say, and then the people who are told they're doing well kind of like feel, well, it's all right, I can kind of relax a bit. There's no need to kind of push and be the best, and I don't need to sort of get, summa cum laude or whatever it's called. Whereas, say, the American students in this case, on hearing that they weren't doing well, they felt kind of like deflated. They felt, well, just lacking enthusiasm. I'm no good, basically. And that didn't motivate them to try. It's like, well, what's the point? But the ones that were doing well, maybe this thing of like, yeah, you can be the best or really go for it. So, again, this is why this is a bit interesting, is that it comes up. It's always been a question in our international Sangha regarding how do you teach Dhamma. And I've just been reading a lot of the upcoming Luang Por Chah biography. And there's a section in it where one of the Thai monks, the senior Thai monks, is talking about Ajahn Chah and saying how he figured out very quickly that the really fierce blasting and the scolding and the admonishing tone that he had to take with the Thais, he absolutely couldn't do that with the Westerners. And that was the image, of course, of Luang Por Chah, especially when he came to the West later in his life, was this very warm, grandfatherly type of figure. And this monk, this Thai monk, was saying that's how he talked to the Westerners. He would call them over, he would ask them how they were doing, he would kind of, if they came and he had a drink, he'd give them a bit of his Pepsi, and they just, the teacher loves me and I'm doing well, and he cares about me and he sees me, and get a little nugget of wisdom. And the Thai monk would come in and he'd kind of go, do it properly, and send him off, Totally different. And so this is sort of pointed to as part of the genius of Ajahn Chah, that he could slip personas on and off, and he could respond absolutely appropriately to whatever the situation called for. So he seemed to have, understood this. And so it comes up a lot then in our training, whether it, in public, as in how you have to skillfully relate to people. And I think the key is that neither one is right or wrong. That has to be, I think, whatever we're like. It's just, it is what it is. We are who we are, or our particular constellation. And then we respond appropriately. And so the skill of the teacher, obviously, is to get it right. But it applies not just to the Sangha, but obviously to life. We're dealing with people all the time. If you're parents or you're in any group situation, you have to understand basically how to relate to people. So this is a skill that the Buddha pointed to as well. It's twofold. One is to know yourself. He called this attanyutta. Atta means oneself, just in the sense of, reflexive pronoun, just, myself, who I am. Anyutta, that knowing of oneself, is a mark of a wise man, a sapurisa Dhamma, a wise person. And also, pugalanyutta, knowing people, knowing other people, is the sign of a wise person. So you know yourself, you know other people, you know how to relate to other people. Very important basic skill. So then, knowing who we are and generally how we respond and how we work, then also we are able to figure out how to then apply the necessary right effort. One, how to cultivate and bring on what's called right effort, and how to apply it. Now, you can speculate a bit, again, in terms of culture, why it might be that a Western, say, mindset might be prone to what's often called, needing to sort of boost up and have sort of sense of self-esteem, whereas the Asian cultures, it's not a big deal. Like in this podcast, it said in Japanese, the word for self-esteem is serfuru estimu. So it's the English just done into Japanese, because they have no word for it, because they never needed it. And any words that are to do with self-esteem that they tried at first, they were words like arrogant, pride, proud, conceited. And so they needed to have this new concept of what we call healthy, like a healthy ego or sense of well-being, a good sense of pride. But it's the same in Thai. There's no real word for self-esteem or this kind of like wholesome pride. So you can think, well, I mean, it may be the kind of theistic Judeo-Christian model where people feel there's big God and created the world, and I have to, and we're in original sin, and, we have to sort of be good and hope for some kind of salvation. So you're always kind of hoping that you're going to be good enough, maybe, And then the samsaric Eastern model is an interesting one, that here we are, we're in this kind of long, unimaginably long flow of samsara, which has no first beginning, there's no creator. And we're told the Buddha points to avidya and tanha, ignorance and craving as the basically what we're all bound up with, and often the starting point for the whole samsaric soup. So it's not the real starting point, but it's an entry into how this process manifests that we're in. Yet at the same time, if you listen to in terms of the more say the cosmological perspective, the Buddha talks about how fortunate this human birth is, that this chance, and I don't know if you've heard this amazing simile, it's as if a blind turtle swimming in the oceans comes up to the surface to breathe once every 100 years. And if floating in the great oceans there's a wooden ring, the chances of taking human birth are the same chances of that turtle every 100 years coming to the surface to breathe, sticking its head through that ring. So the Buddha is saying this is an amazing chance, this is an amazing situation just to be here in this moment. and have this chance just to be a human being, given what could be going on. And I'm sure, just in a very non-religious sense, a non-Buddhist sense, I'm sure many of you have thought, what are the chances of being born? Basically, everything up, in the sort of whole history of the world more or less had to happen for it to take, for us to be born, basically. Slightest change and bingo, that's it, you don't make it. So in a sense, it's pointing the same thing. Just the fact that we're here is quite amazing already. So we might be swimming in the samsaric soup and bound up with ignorance and craving and having lots of kilesas, but we're already doing very, very well. I think so. That's the general message the Buddha is saying. This human realm is a very fortunate one. And those of us that have been lucky enough to, to be here, I mean, most of us probably never had to lack for anything. But we're bound up, what we do know, old age, sickness and death, that no one can go beyond, ignorance and craving. So we have a very good little frame of reference, good perspective. We're very lucky, things are going really well, but there's ignorance and craving, there's old age, sickness and death, dukkha, this is what we're going to look at. So then just to move on then to effort, then it is clear that effort is an important part of the Eightfold Path. And we just chanted it just now. Four aspects of effort, right effort. The effort to prevent unwholesome states from arising. The effort to abandon unwholesome states of mind that have already arisen. The effort to cultivate or to bring on wholesome states of mind. And the effort to nurture, maintain, look after, bring to growth and fulfillment wholesome states. And so we just chanted it in Pali. Now, with each of those stages, there's that line, very nice, Chandang Janeti Vayamati. He puts forth effort, arouses energy and strives. So there's definitely this effort. There's these words like effort, striving, putting forth energy. So again, back to this podcast, it said that in a survey, Japanese people asked to list their favorite words. One of the most favorite words was effort. I mean, can you believe that, right? I mean, here it would be effortless, right? We all want to do it effortlessly. That's the thing. And so again, it's this very, very different perspective. And it's true in Dhamma, we're often taught, as part of the problem is we're sort of trying too hard. The middle way is the kind of like this effortless balance, where it's going just right and just nice. So it's a bit of a paradox. We have to hold these two together, because we've all experienced that too much trying, too much putting forth effort, it does just make us tense and grumpy and miserable, and it doesn't work. Nothing works. That's not the middle way. But effort as a part of the path is very, very important. The little line I quoted at the beginning after Namo Tassa was Viriyena Dukkhang Macheti, which our teacher Luang Por Liam loves to quote, and it means Viriyena, which means through effort. Dukkhang Macheti, one overcomes, or literally one conquers dukkha. So it's put right at the heart of things. It's only through effort. So this is not an easy path in that sense. It's not going to be effortless. But then how to get it right? Then if those of you who like or know your lists of what we call lists of Dhammas, the Buddha at one time summed up the whole kind of set of teachings in this group called the Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, the wings to awakening. Pakka, the wings, so the wings to awakening. Is a whole list. And interestingly, effort is in every single one of those lists. So it's in the Four Noble Truths, with this, because the Four Noble Truths divided into the Eightfold Path. It's in what's called the Four Right Efforts. It's a list in itself, these four efforts I just outlined and we chanted a few minutes ago. It's in the Four Roads to Success, what's called effort and energy is an important part of that. It's in the five balas, the five powers and the five faculties: faith, effort, mindfulness, samadhi and panya. It's in what's called the seven bojjhangas, the seven factors of awakening, and it's in the Eightfold Path. So the Buddha put together summed up the whole teaching in various different lists, and effort is in there as part of it, and always implying right effort. So how do we do it? So I think the wording of this, what we just chanted, is very, very useful. The first thing is that there's no external guideline. When it comes to effort, it's not talking about how many hours you sleep and how many mouthfuls of food you eat and how much you say every day. Right effort's got to be varied based on day-to-day, based on who we are, based on causes and conditions. It literally means doing the right thing at the right time for the purpose of abandoning unwholesome mental states, basic greed, hatred, and delusion, ignorance, craving, and bringing on wise states, peace, metta, wisdom, truth, compassion, brahmaviharas. So that has to, again, it's very, very clear. What are we doing here? It's all about that. The form, the chanting, the teachings, sleeping, eating, however we do it, Zen, Theravada, Tibetan, it's all got to be actually bound up with these things. And so again, it's very, very clear then. We look at our mind, we've got greed, hatred, and delusion, or right intention, sort of non-sensuality, non-harming, non-ill will. So abandoning the unwholesome, bringing on the wholesome bit by bit, and then using all these practices that we can take on, or all these various teachings. And then I think this is something which certainly builds up, which is going to build up in us, like build up in us, bit by bit. And obviously through a lot of making mistakes, through a lot of willing to learn and listen and take on teachings, and finding right suitable situations. But certainly one that comes with with effort. Like, to go back to this thing of teaching and what's the right way to teach people. When I was in my second year as a monk, I went to stay in a Thai branch monastery. That was my first experience in a Thai branch monastery. And it was just so clear, again, how different the flavor of teaching was. Basically, the abbot, he was very, very friendly, very sweet, not at all fierce. But Dhamma talks would often just be kind of more or less berating us all, one by one. Oh, you did that. Either slightly fierce, admonishing, and often laughing, and then we'd all be kind of laughing as well, because just 4 or 5 of us in this monastery, like a little family. So, kind of little stuff like so-and-so fell over, or so-and-so broke a glass, and so-and-so's robe didn't come out the right color. Kind of anything was a sort of source of humor, kind of cause of a bit of laughter, in a way that I think a lot of Westerners would just find, not inspiring. Be wondering, what's going on. Bringing up our defilements and all, kind of having a shared laugh. And yeah, I certainly got like lots of them. It's just kind of really keen, and then I'd be kind of doing things wrong or a bit funny. There'd be work projects, and I just didn't know how to join in with the work and get it all wrong. That kind of thing. Kind of just all the kind of classic stories you've heard. And then it'd just be brought up, and we'd all have a sort of shared laugh that evening. But as well as that, this real keenness to put forth effort. Whether it was like learning our chanting or doing this or doing that, there was a sense of, you've got to really go for it. Don't just kind of slack off. Don't just kind of sit there. Go for it. We can kind of do this. Like, raise ourselves up, saying, look, the teachers, Luang Por Cha, the enlightened ones, they've kind of like opened up the road for us. And it's not like we're going to just sit here and just like reap the fruits. It's not just going to drop into our laps. It's like, okay, we're going to go for it and lead the way with like all night sitting and all these kind of things. And it was really like a bit like, not kind of macho, but certainly that flavor of striving. And you could say like putting forth effort, and sometimes doing things, working all day and then going to evening chanting or making things and whatever, doing our requisites, really doing it. And the teacher would say, do it well, make it beautiful. And I remember at first I heard that, I was thinking, the abbot's looks like he's into like beauty, the monks were making bowl stands, and he was saying to them, make it really beautiful, don't just make a second-rate one, make a really good one. And I was thinking, that doesn't sound like contentment and that kind of thing. But the more I was there, he was basically saying, look, if you're going to do it right. If you're going to make a beautiful one. Don't just settle for second best. You can really go for it. Why not? And that's, they channeled, I could see they were channeling a lot of their energy. Maybe it would have been sexual energy or restless energy or negativity into creating beautiful little bowl stands, or the ones that were into the building work would kind of do the building, and the ones that, whatever, like doing this and that. So that was a real kind of eye-opening experience, just getting that flavor of the absolute contrast from the flavor at Wat Pah Nanachat and being around the Westerners, where we relate to each other in a very different way. So to come back to this effort and the bringing on this effortless effort, how then do we do it? A simile I have for it, is I think something like, that amazing sight of, say, the divers, this springboard diving, where they're just kind of on this diving platform, or a board, springboard, or the platform. They more or less take 3 steps, or even standing backwards, on their toes on the edge of the platform, and then they just spring off like that. And then in that, they're in the air at that point, and in that motion, in that moment, you've seen this, I'm sure, that gymnastics is the same, trampolining. Something absolutely incredible unfolds, comes to take place. And of course, the point is, at that moment, it's effortless. It looks absolutely, they're not thinking it through, that's for sure. And it's beautiful, it's incredible. But obviously, we know what goes into that. They don't just go there and do it. What goes into that, to bring that on, is the effort that goes into it, as well as the fact that obviously I think you have to enjoy it. So that's a key part of this lifestyle, this monastic life, or you're doing your Dhamma practice. The practice, even when it's, you could say, difficult, has to be enjoyable, because that's how, when we feel something's effortless, is when we're actually enjoying it. As you know, we can be doing sports, we can do mountain biking, or you can be sitting all day absorbed in a project. Your back can even be aching, or whatever, or you can be going without food. But because of that absorption and that fascination, that enjoyment with it, the effort that you're putting, that's genuinely there, but it feels effortless. Time goes by in a flash. You don't even realize what you're doing, and actually you don't want to leave it. You don't want to, if somebody say, look, go and have a rest, you say, no, I don't want to rest, I'm really into this. So it's not that there's no effort going on, but it's enjoyable. And that's a real key, whether it comes to your meditation, formal meditation practice, this monk's life, the whole thing. It's this combination of not only enjoyment, and the effort that we put in then has to be sustainable, and it has to be one where we see growth. I think that's something which, as well, as people, we're conditioned to want to see growth. I think we get depressed basically very quickly, whether it's a project or a venture in lay life, or our monastic life. If we just feel like somehow it's really not working, day in, day out, it's not working, I'm not growing. So I think it's important to look for little improvements, not necessarily to look for big improvements, because it's the little improvements that will then give us encouragement. Because I know for myself, as long as I feel I'm kind of going in the right direction, or I'm on the path, whatever it is, then that feels okay. That feels fine. Even at times when, like this expression, the learning curve, at first it can seem to be really difficult, like you're not getting anywhere. But as long as you feel, well, my lack of progress now is because of the information that I'm learning and I'm assimilating. I just can't see the progress. But if I look at what I've learned, it has to manifest. A bit like, again, the Lumpur Cha and the teachers would always compare it to planting some kind of tree or some kind of fruit or a potato or something. You don't see the results straight away above the ground. But because of your experience and because of faith, you know that it's all happening below the ground, and the actual fruits are going to first manifest in a while, like be visible, and then before you can even eat the fruit might be a few years. But that's the role of patience, which is another factor of effort. So it comes in, when you begin to look at it and see right effort, it's there all the time. The effort to be moderate, the effort to know time and place, the effort to know what's right, what's not right. All of these things, they're not just like natural. We don't take anything to be like spontaneous, God-given gifts here. The karmic perspective and the sense of taking personal responsibility for your life means that, whatever fruits we receive, we've brought them on. And so we take responsibility for things. But again, that's the key. If we weren't responsible for our lives, how would we liberate ourselves? And we have to be. It all fits very much into place, this principle of self being one's own refuge. We can't depend on anyone else. Ultimately, we can hear teachings, we can read this and that book, we can do devotions to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, but those are all our own internal experiences of them. It's all about our own mind and what we're doing. And so our teachers talk about the need to have this sort of effortless approach to meditation. But it's never really going to be like totally effortless. But then at the end, or even not at the end, but when we get it right, then it can begin to feel effortless, like it's enjoyable. We like doing it. Kind of make mistakes, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's okay. That's not a problem. I mean, there's nothing in life that's going to be effortless. It can't be totally in that sense, but it has to feel that way. And then more and more internalized, then it becomes like more and more natural, just in the same way that, for example, once you've taken your food from the buffet table, no one has to really sit down and show you how to eat. You don't have to scratch your head and think, now how am I going to do this? It's quite effortless at that point, I think you could say. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of chewing and even picking and choosing and tasting and this and that. But it's quite effortless. And boom, oh, what happened? Where did that go? Sometimes you kind of, 20 minutes just blips by, half an hour. And so there's always effort in the right sense, and that's how it feels effortless. And I think the idea is that more and more we begin to somehow access. But a lot of it is to do with this thing of knowing oneself, this attanyita. So knowing how do we respond to stimulus, whether it's somebody else's feedback, but most of the time we're giving ourselves feedback. By far the majority, the voice we listen to most of all is our own, in our head. And so we have to know, kind of like, it's what they call stick and the carrot, there's similarly like stick and carrot. It can't be all stick and it can't be all carrot. This is the idea of a donkey. It's got this carrot on dangling in front of it, and so the donkey keeps walking because it's going towards the carrot. The carrot keeps moving ahead of it, or the stick. Would you beat it behind? So it's never going to be one or the other. We have to know ourselves well and know what kind of thoughts to give ourselves. Sometimes we have to, some people respond more to like, yeah, come on, go for it, push it in a good way. Whereas for other people, as soon as they feel that, they just, not going to be happy in that situation. So again, these are just a few words. Don't want to talk too long. Just share something with you. I think it's quite interesting, relevant, and something which you can all apply. This again, to come back to, like, say, the Buddha's teachings on something like abandoning. This is the last point. He could be quite emphatic regarding abandoning unwholesome states of mind. So again, this is an example of the balance. We have this principle of often just sitting with and experiencing an unwholesome state. It can be fear, greed, anger. It's a lot of these kind of ones. Doubt, concern, agitation. Just being with it. And being with it, and then maybe like, letting it go, or maybe just the being with it because it's impermanent, has to pass. But often it doesn't necessarily pass. And there can be a danger of being with it and fueling it. So even when the teachers give this advice, they say, be careful. Don't be with it too long. Don't just fuel it. Don't get into a rut. You can just be with my anger, be with your anger. But sometimes the language of the Buddha is very, very emphatic. He uses words like, he abandons it, makes an end of it so that it doesn't arise again. So it's really this idea of throwing it off, or gives a simile of a young man or a young woman fond of ornaments, how they would respond if they had a human head or a carcass of a snake or a dog hung around their neck, how would they respond? They would be disgusted, humiliated, and horrified, and try and abandon it straight away. So this is the kind of language generally doesn't get presented in the West. Sort of, you have to be disgusted and humiliated by your unwholesome states. You know, it's like, well, we feel guilty enough already. It's just like, you know, don't make it worse. But at times there is the time for knowing, I just got to get rid of this, man. You know, like, I can't just sit with this anger all the time. Really, just to know this is really unwholesome. This has got to go. So again, we have to find our own way. That's the middle way. Finding the middle way between a bit of gentle receiving, acknowledging, knowing, watching, observing, that kind of practice, and then the kind of, okay, I've got to sort this out. The Buddha says in the Pali, bhyanti karoti, means he makes an end of it. It's kind of like, you know, it sounds quite sort of, I wouldn't say extreme, but emphatic, you could say. Or this image we were talking about the other night of, you got an unwholesome state of mind and you can't, the more subtle methods don't work. So with your teeth clenched, tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he crushes mind with mind. And that's quite kind of, you know, kind of emphatic language. Sometimes that's what you've got to do. And then you can do the more relaxed practice when it's not so intense. So again, the middle way is a lot to do with finding what is the balance of right effort. So just to end on that, say a few words, hope to encourage you to find the way to make effort bit by bit, abandon the unwholesome, so that the path becomes and feels more and more effortless.